Hello everyone and welcome back to another Hitbox analysis video. Today we'll be taking a look at everyone's favorite space pirate reptile alien, that being Ridley. While he was previously deemed too big in the earlier installments, in Ultimate they cut him down to size. But did his hitboxes get the same treatment? Why don't we find out? Today's character was decided by a Patreon poll on my Patreon. If you want to vote on characters I should cover next, there will be new polls after every video, so that's definitely the place to be. Visuals as usual were made by Zeckemyro. There are links to everything in the description. Ridley's jab is the good old jab that I now have a lot more appreciation for after the Kazuya video. It's nice to be back to basics. It has 4 hitboxes, 2 of which are overlaid. The 2 that are overlaid have 1 hitbox that drags other fighters in, while the other hitbox launches away. This is to avoid making items like green shells launch into you when you jab them, so it doesn't really matter for competitive. Jab 2 has 3 hitboxes that just stun you, nothing spectacular about it. After this you can either continue with a rapid jab or a gentleman. The gentleman looks like this. It is a bite consisting of 2 hitboxes that just launch away, while the rapid jab is a bunch of tail stings followed up by a launcher of a pretty good size. All I have to say about this move is that it's really nice that it's not 10-hit combo. Aside from that, it's a pretty standard old jab, just the way I like it. While we're at it, I'd like to briefly show Ridley's hurtbox. It is pretty standard, but does have a few notable things to consider. Ridley does have hurtboxes on his tail and wings, but they only cover the parts closer to his body, meaning they have a sort of built-in disjoint on all moves that use these limbs. In addition, his jaw hurtbox is a bit odd, his lower jaw being way bigger than his upper one. Aside from that, it's pretty normal though. Ridley's F-tilt is another tail attack out in front of him. This one also consists of 3 hitboxes. The tipper is the strongest, dealing 13%, while the others closer only deal 10%. The hitboxes in the back are noticeably bigger however, making for a pretty nice safety net should you misspace the move. You can angle the move up or down, though this does not change anything about the hitboxes besides their precision. His down tilt is a tail swipe along the ground. It is quite simple, only consisting of 2 hitboxes. The tipper is the strongest, dealing 9%, while the other ones deal 6. Because of the previously mentioned lack of hurtboxes on the edge of his tail, this move is actually decently disjointed, making it a pretty good poking move, though its damage can be a little bit lacking. His up tilt has Ridley throw his wings out above him, covering an arc starting behind him and ending up in front. It has 5 hitboxes, 4 of which are sour spots, while the smaller purple hitbox is actually a sweet spot, dealing 9 instead of 7%. On top of that, the purple hitbox is out-prioritized by the red one, and does share a pretty huge overlap, meaning it is quite hard to land the sweet spot all things considered. The hitboxes themselves cover a really nice amount of area in the air, and in addition his wings and head are intangible during some of the active frames, making it quite hard to challenge from the air. It can even hit characters standing in front and behind you on the ground. However, it might be a bit hard to hit smaller characters, because the hitboxes start and end so far up in the air because of Ridley's height, so be wary of that. Dash attack I really have nothing to say about. It's probably one of the most textbook examples of a hitbox in the game. Like, it's just a single hitbox that just launches away. That is it. Nothing more, nothing less. Instead, I guess I can briefly talk about Ridley's weight, which is notable for being, in my opinion, way lower than you would expect. Like, he's heavy for sure, but he's the same weight as Ike, Wario, and Belmont. You would expect he would be among the top 5 heaviest in the game or something like that, but I guess when they shrunk him down for Ultimate, they also made him work on his diet a little bit. Can't imagine you can find much good healthy food out in space to begin with, so it's probably for the best. Ridley's grabs are fairly uninteresting. His normal standing grab is the standard Ultimate grab range, reaching exactly as far as his arms, and not a centimeter more. His dash grab, on the other hand, is actually even smaller than the standing one, though granted this one does move a bit, so it does technically cover more distance. His pivot grab has a ton of range however, though without being able to run through opponents, its utility is pretty narrow. As we move on to aerials, it's worth mentioning that Ridley has 2 jumps, which is nice for recovering and keeping up pressure high in the air, though as with most multi-jump characters, he is kinda punished by generally having more lag on aerials, in order to prevent frame traps from happening too often, which is a little bit unfortunate, but is understandable. All things considered, it's not as bad as with certain other characters. We certainly have an interesting one to start with. Neutral air is an attack where Ridley does a backflip and swings his tail after him. The move has 3 hitboxes, with the tip of his tail being the sweet spot dealing 12%, and the 2 other ones being sour spots dealing 9%. On the later frames of the move, however, all the hitboxes get a bit weaker. The hitboxes themselves are actually very solid, and cover a good amount of area in total. It's a pretty strong aerial overall. Forward air consists of 3 tail stabs in the air. The first hit has 6 hitboxes, 3 for grounded and 3 for aerial opponents. They are all there to make sure the later hits of the move connect properly. The second hit also just stunts you, although now there are only 3 of them. And lastly, the final hit just launches away. The tipper hitbox is once again stronger, dealing 2% more on all hits of the move. Back air has Ridley doing a kick behind him. It's a very simple move just consisting of 3 identical hitboxes launching away. The hitboxes are pretty big however, covering his entire leg, some of his body, and even the area around his leg. It's a bit slow and laggy, but does hit pretty hard. It's a good move overall. Ridley's up air is pretty impressive. It has 2 hitboxes, one massive one covering all of Ridley's wings, and a smaller one on the tips, which is a little bit stronger, dealing 14 instead of 12%. The move has a ton of range, as you can see, and trying to challenge this will only land you a trade at best, though I should note that the part of his wings without hurtboxes are the ones that are being used here, meaning you don't actually get any disjoint on the move, besides the very tips of the wings. It's still a great move though, even if it's not as disjointed as it could have been. Down air is a bit of an odd move. Ridley stomps down in the air, and it works a lot like other dive kicks where the momentum is cancelled and he just suddenly travels down. On the first few frames of the move there are 2 hitboxes. The smaller red one is a spike, while the purple one launches away. The spike hitbox in this case is the dominant hitbox, meaning it does override the purple one when they overlap. After a while the red hitbox goes away, and only the purple one remains. The move has no landing hitbox, which it absolutely would have had if Ridley was a DLC character, but I digress. The move is not super great. You often can't even make it back on stage if you use it off stage, because it just has so much lag. It's one of his less good moves for sure. Now up B actually has 4 variations to it. Strange. I thought they only made tons of move variations on push DLC characters that they really wanted to be good. Granted, it's not exactly that significant here, but all the variations do have unique hitboxes. Up B upwards has 2 hitboxes, which are kinda reminiscent of up air, although these 2 hitboxes are the same and are actually even stronger. Forward has a much less impressive hitbox, only covering his head and torso. It's also a bit weaker than the up version. Down version actually has a spike. However, it only hits other people in the air. If they are grounded, it just launches them away. In addition, it also has a landing hitbox, which is pretty nice. Finally, the back version has 2 hitboxes, much like the up version, both of which just launch away. All the variations have partial intangibility on his wings, besides the down version, since that one does not actually use his wings. Side B is a command grab, which has 2 slight variations, one aerial and a grounded one. Ridley leaps forward and attempts to grab you. On the first frame it has 3 hitboxes covering his arm and the area around his head. After that it's just on his hand, however. The darker purple hits aerial opponents while the other hits grounded. If you grab an opponent, you'll drag them along the ground, until you press the button again, in which you will launch them. The move can be mashed out of, however, so you don't want to wait too long. The aerial version is pretty much the same, except if you grab people in the air. Here you run the possibility of just slamming into the blast zone, so use it at own risk. For one of the more infamous moves Ridley has, we have down B, which is certainly an interesting one. Ridley does a stab with his tail, but unlike all the other tail stabs he has, this one is even more powerful. Now granted, if you can land the tipper of this move, it is extremely powerful, though the hitbox is very unforgiving on this move. It has a very slim hitbox along his tail. If you miss the sweet spot, it deals very little damage and hardly stuns them at all. Should you hit this tiny sweet spot, however, you will deal a ton of damage and crumple the opponent, forcing them to do a tech get up. Aside from that, the hitbox is actually pretty straightforward. It's high risk, high reward, though all things considered, I think the risk might be a little higher than the reward in this case. For our first and only projectile, we have neutral B, which is plasma breath, though it looks an awful lot like normal fire to me. The visuals look like this. It's not animated, but you could probably imagine how it plays out. Early on, the hitboxes are a bit bigger, and get slightly smaller during the lifetime of the move. If you charge the move all the way, the hitboxes are also slightly bigger as well. Should you hit Ridley around his head area while he's charging the move, it will backfire, and deal damage to you relative to the amount of time it was charged. So up close, you have to be a little bit careful when using this move. And lastly, we have 3 quite distinct smash attacks. Starting with up smash. It's a kick into the air consisting of 3 hitboxes. It covers a similar arc like with up tilt, though in this case it starts out and ends a bit lower, though still not low enough where it will always catch smaller characters. The hitboxes are all the same with no damage variations at any point in the move. On top of that, Ridley's leg is also partially intangible during the active frames, making it a pretty handy move overall. Now F smash is another one of those really blunt moves that is just a single huge hitbox that launches away. The move is really powerful and the hitbox is quite big, all things considered. There's really not a lot to say about it. It's really remarkable how simple some of these hitboxes can really be, compared to some of the wild DLC hitboxes we have looked at in the past. Finally, we have down smash, which is probably my favorite hitbox he has. Ridley does a jump into the air, which is a great example of some not so deceptive hurtbox shifting. You can very easily just jump over a lot of moves doing this, and let me tell you, it feels pretty bad to miss a move like this. When he lands, he has this hitbox, which is just another massive hitbox. This one covering the ground, however. It reaches way farther to the sides than it lets on, making it a really disjointed move actually. It's powerful too. Definitely one of the more unique down smashes in the game. Anyways, that covers Ridley. It's always really nice to return to a base game character after a DLC hitbox video, especially cause you was something else. It's nice to see that you can have a totally functional character without a ton of hitboxes all over the place, and intangibility on nearly every move. Even though Ridley might not be the greatest character in this game, I would really not say that is because of his hitboxes, as they seem to be pretty good overall, However, that just about does it. Again, there will be a new poll on my Patreon for the next hitbox video starting today, so should that interest you, there will be a link in the description. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.